First out of the box.
Top marks for eagerness anyway. I'd like to take a call on this bill, Mr. Chair. And we'll get into the details, obviously, in this committee stage as we go through this. But in many ways, what this bill has done, it's been able to unite the people of Auckland in a way that no other thing has ever done before. We have had an issue with the way that Auckland has been fragmented, it's been fractured, it's not been coherent, it's not been unified, and yet this bill, the introduction of this bill and the way that this bill has been introduced, has in fact united people against the bill. So you have a Digipoll that says more than 60% of Aucklanders are against the way that this government has handled this. Now, if you look at the NGO Our Auckland, this is more than 9,000 people. Do you approve of the way in which the government is setting up the new Auckland Council, the super city? Yes, 4%. No, 96%. Has the government officially asked you what kind of Auckland you want? No, 94%. Do you think the government has paid enough attention to the wishes of Aucklanders before restructuring? No, 95%. 95%. This bill has done what no other thing has ever done for Auckland before. It's brought John Banks, Len Brown, Michael Barnett, environmentalists, Maori, a whole bunch of people who would never be in the same room together in normal circumstances. They're sitting here united against this bill going forward. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing, Mr. Henry, because this bill has done what no other issue has done for Auckland before. Excellent. The real tragedy of it is, on the one hand, is that it is a disastrous public relations exercise for the government, and as it goes forward through this year and continues to fail and falter, it will be fodder for the opposition during the election. The tragedy is that will be at the expense of ordinary Aucklanders that will miss out on the opportunity to have a city which they cherish and really want. And it's worth going back to have a look at the history of the way that this was actually carried out, because it's the process in which this has gone through which is at the real heart of the problem in Auckland. Let's think back. Let's think back to the Royal Commission. A Royal Commission, 2 years. 2 years it deliberated. $4 million it spent. 3,000 submissions they'd heard, and within 9 days of that Royal Commission reporting, out comes the government's own report. The government's own report setting out what it believes Auckland wants without any reference to the Royal Commission. The Royal Commission, which had patiently heard, deliberated, thought carefully about what Auckland really needed. That was the real tragedy. That was the beginning of the end, in many ways, of this process, Mr. Chair. It meant the end, for example, of a bipartisan approach. I mean, there was deliberate thought that went in on this side of the House that perhaps that we should, in fact, get behind this bill in the early stages, and it should be a bipartisan approach that should drive this through, so that we actually could hear all of Auckland's real concerns, and what we'd be able to think very much as the House, as Parliament, as one body, about what one-third of New Zealanders might want and might need. But instead we get the extraordinary arrogance, really, the extraordinary arrogance of a government putting down in front of Aucklanders what they believe Aucklanders need, without real consultation and without real reference to either the Royal Commission, which had deliberated on it, without any reference to Aucklanders itself. And then we had to go through the farce, Mr. Chair, the farce of the first bill. The first bill that didn't even acknowledge any Auckland input, but they had to be pushed through under urgency which necessitated us working through here, through the weekend, through the night, in order to make the point that on behalf of Aucklanders, for which, Mr Chair?
David Shearer.
On behalf of Aucklanders, for which we cared, for who we cared, this side of the House, we were prepared to go that extra mile in order to be able to put forward what their beliefs is. The second bill heard what Aucklanders had to say. What did they have to say? What they had to say was they did not agree with the way the government was doing it. They did not agree with the powers of the CCOs. They did not agree with the lack of power of the local boards. They believed that this was the end of democracy and the end of their voice in Auckland. Again, I don't think that the government in many ways realised or anticipated or expected that sort of a response from Auckland. Recently, the New Zealand Herald, Bernard Orsman wrote a piece which had the headline, "A win for the people." A win for the people, because for the first time, Mr Chair, for the first time, we could see that the activities of Aucklanders, the 760 submissions that went into this third bill, the activities of the Auckland MPs on this side of the House, fighting to stand up for what Aucklanders really wanted. Finally, the government had to recognise, had to listen, because they realised if they didn't, they were going to lose the votes of Auckland at the next election. This wasn't any great shift because of Aucklanders' real wishes. The ideology that underlies, the substructure that underlies all of this bill is still there. It's simply, what we've done is we've tweaked it and fiddled with it around the edges to make it more palatable for Auckland, so that it will be able to glide through, and we'll be able to give the impression as we go into the local elections that there's been some changes, that we might have actually listened. But really, Mr Chair, we haven't listened. This government has not listened at all. It has not listened to New Zealanders. It has not listened to Aucklanders. It has not listened to the fact that Auckland, despite its beauty, and it was voted, I think it was the Mercer Quality of Living Survey 2010, put Auckland 4th or 5th place in the world out of 221 cities, was voted one of the best quality of life in the world, the great place to live. Despite the beauty of Auckland, we have politicians who insist that they know better for Auckland, and they don't have to listen. This, in many ways, this third bill, finally we had a process in which Aucklanders had their voice heard. We enabled that voice to be heard on this side of the House. We listened with care and deliberation. We listened carefully, not in a select committee, and I sat in the odd time in that select committee as well, where the other side nodded but had absolutely no intention of being able to really listen carefully and make any changes to the legislation. Oh no, they listened politely, carefully, nodded their heads, gave many of them a shake of the hand, a hug, and said, "Thank you for your contribution." But it didn't make any difference, Mr Chair. It actually made no difference. Mr Chair, this is a city which I grew up in. It's my home. I was born there. I was schooled there. I sail on the water. I tramp in the Waitakaris. This is a place that I care about. This is a place in which I represent the people of Mount Albert. And when I walk around the streets of Mount Albert, Mr Chair, everybody that I meet, that I ask about the super city, they say, "What is this government doing? What is this government doing?" This government is not doing what we wanted them to do. This government is doing what they wanted them to do, what their ideology says, led by that man there, Mr Chair, led by Mr Hyde, who has tried to railroad his ideology right through the middle of Auckland, and Auckland has said no. Auckland has said no, Mr Chair. And this bill and the changes that had to take place to this bill, it is far from perfect. It is far from what we are able to accept on this side of the House. but the changes made to this bill